Rockford residents have a second chance to learn more about a planned project that would improve parts of South Alpine Road. A public meeting was held tonight at Forest City Church where leaders and representatives from the Illinois Department of Transportation answered questions about a study that weighed different improvement options for a 2.5-mile road between Linden Road and Charles Street. The preliminary phase is expected to wrap up in summer 2027.
One of the things that we're very much emphasizing is there have been a significant amount of pedestrian accidents along this corridor, so we are definitely looking at providing better pedestrian and bicycle accommodations along it, which is just a modern way of doing things.